now call IanEllis Jones, and he's going to talk about the relationship between humanism and the Unitarian Church. And there's some very interesting concepts in there, and there are sort of understandings of religion which are quite subtle, and I'm sure that you'll find it very interesting. And while these talks for this symposium, you know, looking from different things, when you go far enough into it, it starts to form a mosaic, and there are all sorts of linkages in there. And so while at any given time you don't know what that linkage is, when you get far enough into it, you'll collide into those linkages. So I guess it's a call for a bit of patience, because the sort of framework of thought we're on is quite complex. And it's also, speaking personally, it was one of the reasons why preparing this symposium was so stressful, because of having to keep in mind so many different linkages and the fear of dropping the ball at this point or that point. But anyway, IanEllis Jones.
I'll treat that as thanks for Frank. Brings back many memories to hear him again after 40 years. He was my lecturer in economics at Sydney Uni. Merriweather Building, 1973, first year of arts law. And the government with Dennis Altman, another legendary figure, great Australian, activist, author, leader in the gay movement, and philosophy with David Armstrong, who died recently, a great materialist. They were great days to be there and to be alive. Thank you for that. And you know, I've had a fairly long connection with the Humanist movement, and I believe I still do, even though I'm not currently a member of the Humanist Society of New South Wales. I was a president of it, vice president, and national president. I still identify as a humanist. I reject all forms of traditional theism, and I reject supernatural views of reality. And they're the two basic things identified in the minimum statement for humanism in the IHEU, International Humanist and Ethical Union. Having said that, there has been, perhaps unwittingly, a sense today that you've got humanism, which is on the side of reason, and you've got on the other side this evil called religion, which is irrational. It's not as simple as that. It never was. And I think one of the things, and it sort of upset me somewhat when I was in the Humanist Society in positions of leadership, was that constantly having to, and someone who came out of a religious movement in various forms, it's much more subtle than that. Religion itself, I see, is not the enemy. Irrationality is, superstition, supernaturalism, and various things like that. The belief that there is a revealed body of truth and infallibility notions and all of that are dangerous things. And I'm proud to be a heretic. But I move around a lot of circles. Last night I went to a solemn high mass followed by a benediction service at Christchurch St Lawrence. That's a fascinating church with a wonderful history. It's rare in the Sydney Anglican Diocese. It's one of only 5 high churches, and it's more than high. It's called Anglo-Catholic. For many years it had a wonderful rector, Father John Hope, who was a pacifist, a Christian socialist, a humanist in the sense that he expounded a theology which is still expounded there called incarnational theology, which is basically a theology of man. So the rector knows where I stand on these matters, and he does not feel at all concerned. Welcome there. Wouldn't be welcome in most Anglican churches. But I move around, including Buddhist places as well, and have a lot of time for certain forms of humanism and Buddhism. Sorry, Buddhism. It's not simple, because I found, I don't want to be critical of the body that's kindly invited me here, but I found, I think, more irrational people amongst the humanists than I've ever found in any religious groups. And I found amongst many religious groups, certainly I don't mix anymore with fundamentalists and evangelicals, and if anyone's seen any of my writings, I rail against them, fearless and tireless fighter against fundamentalism. But I found amongst the religious people I move that there's a lot of rationality and a lot of similar beliefs to what you people hold. So it's quite complex, and I'm pleased to see that the human society has come to, somewhat begrudgingly in some ways, a greater understanding that we're dealing with a very complex situation, that religion itself is not the evil. I remember discussing this with Paul Kurtz. It's not going to go away, religion. It's constantly changing, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. At the moment we're in a rather dark age of fundamentalism in a number of religious and political aspects of life. It'll pass. Hopefully by the time it passes it hasn't done too much damage. It's not a black and white world. Dr. Kinsey said the world cannot be divided into sheep and goats, despite what the Bible said. Not all things are black nor all white, he said. Only the human mind invents categories and tries to force facts into separate pigeonholes, and that's what we do. We put labels. Labels are dangerous. You might be interested to know that humanism has had a great influence on Christianity. And anyone that's been to a theological college, and I did 4 years of that after all my other degrees in law and whatnot, you learn the extent to which humanism and various movements associated with that have had on Christian theology. That's for another day, perhaps. I just want to talk about Unitarianism, which this wonderful man down here, David Tribe, whose books have greatly impacted upon my life, and it's so great to see you again, bless you. He made it clear that Unitarianism as it is today moves very much within the humanist movement in the form of liberal religion. Whenever I say to people, I work part of the week as a lawyer, because I have to still earn some money to support my wife and family. Whenever I say that I'm a Unitarian minister, they say, what the hell is that? Unitarianism? Is that Uniting Church or this sort of thing? Listen, these are some of the famous Unitarians over time. And I'm not picking people here who had a peripheral association with Unitarianism, but ones who were quite committed to it. Sir Isaac Newton. He was mentioned there as one of the heroes of the Enlightenment. Joseph Priestley. Remember him and oxygen? Thomas Jefferson. And others who were also founding fathers of the US, like Benjamin Franklin and Alexander Hamilton. Incredible. Thomas Paine, been mentioned. Charles Darwin. Frank Lloyd Wright. Alexander Graham Bell. Remember that? The telephone? Susan B. Anthony, the great feminist, social activist. You'll find Unitarianism and social activism always go together. Ralph Waldo Emerson. 5 US presidents. I mentioned the third one, Jefferson, but the second one, the first vice president. John Adams. Unitarian. His son, John Quincy Adams. Millard Fillmore, William Howard Taft. President Obama, well, he won't come out and say he's a Unitarian because it would be political suicide these days in terms of how the Unitarian Church has changed over the years. But his mother was a Unitarian, and his grandmother, whom he adored so much in Hawaii, he grew up, he went to the first Unitarian Church of Honolulu, Hawaii, where I've spoken. He's very much a religious liberal. And one of the reasons why Southern Baptists and others hate him, they know his background. Adlai Stevenson, Catherine Spence for many years on our $5 note. They called her the grand old woman of Australia, great social activist. Oh, look, I could go on. Pete Seeger, one of those great folk singer who died recently. So many. Longfellow. Let's move on. I want to talk a little bit about humanism and the values of the Enlightenment, how that impacted upon Unitarianism. But I suppose I better start talking a little bit about what the hell Unitarianism is. When we say the Unitarian Church, there's actually no such thing. I mean, it's a bit like saying the Baptist Church. There are certain churches where there is no such single church. There are collections of independent churches. And sometimes you'll find that there are national or international associations. There are with the Unitarians, with the Unitarians, Universalists in Australia. You were right in saying there's never been a Universalist church as such in Australia, but there are some that use the word Universalist as part of their name. There is a body with New Zealand called the Australian and New Zealand Unitarian and Universalist Association of Australia. The international body is the International Council of Unitarians and Universalists, the ICUU. We're dealing very much with a church, or a collection of churches, but I will speak of it as the Unitarian Church, but it's really just a collection of churches that have been infused with the spirit and the values and the ethos of the Enlightenment and Humanism. Originally, for many years, Unitarianism moved within the orbit of Christianity, but for the most part was never really accepted as part of the Christian church, because it rejected a couple of key doctrines. People say, oh, that was a Trinity, that's why they called Unitarians. Well, the label Unitarianism was used by its detractors. It wasn't the label that they chose for themselves. The Trinity, the idea that God is in three persons, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. I know many Unitarians who accept that idea, if not literally, in some sort of creative or metaphysical sense. The problem was not so much the Trinity and other aspects associated with it. It was the idea that Jesus was uniquely and exclusively God. That's the problem they had. They saw him more as an enlightened human being, as a way shower. That the idea that he died for our sins, that was always a problem for Unitarians. They saw basically that we're individuals, that we're responsible for our own actions, and if there's a thing called karma, they wouldn't have used that word, we're responsible for making the necessary changes in ourselves. No one can do it for us. You have to be your own teacher, your own pupil. And that's still very much the case. From the very beginning, the Unitarian Church could be seen to be a church of the Enlightenment. It placed a lot of emphasis on promoting the highest good for all. That's been mentioned, that idea. On the authority of reason, conscience and experience. In a spirit of rational humaneness. A phrase that I love, and I know the Human Society uses it. It had something to do with it getting adopted. But I first heard the phrase rational humaneness from a wonderful humanist that I also had at Sydney Uni, Professor Gordon Hawkins, now dead too. But he didn't invent the phrase. He attributed it to Viscount Morley, an Anglo-Irish politician, statesman who was something of a radical in Victorian England. I'm sure that's mentioned in the Free Thought book. Unitarianism, though, its theological roots don't go back to further than the Reformation. You'll find its theological roots in monotheistic Judaism. Its philosophical roots go right back to groups like the Stoics, the Skeptics, the Epicureans. Today's Unitarianism, particularly as a result of developments that happened in America in the late 1800s, and I'll come to those later, but when whole humanist churches all over the country embraced, Unitarian churches embraced humanism, it would have to be seen as a post-Christian church. The fellowship that I have now, which is a home fellowship, I did pastor the church not too far from here in East Sydney. The home church I have now consists of a few former law students of mine. I taught law for many years at UTS. Most would be atheists in the traditional sense of an atheist, someone who, I think all but lack theistic belief, as that's ordinarily understood. Some, like myself, will use the God word occasionally, but will make it clear that I'm not referring to any supernatural or suprapersonal being or person. We have Buddhists, we have Humanists, we have some progressive Christians. We're going to get an evangelical Christian wanting to join us, but we certainly have progressive Christians of the kind you find in some of the more liberal Christian churches. It can't be seen to be a single religious denomination anymore when you've got Christians, Buddhists, atheists and others, pagans, all sorts of people. It's more of a meta-religion. It's been described as that. And I think that's a helpful term. I think it's better probably to see it as an approach to religion. It's a way of looking at religion, but not just religion. It's a way of looking at the arts, music, the science, and like humanism and skepticism, it's a very skeptical approach that favours the use of reason over any sense of faith, of that term is normally understood. It's a praxis, a wonderful term that refers to a particular and distinctive way in which certain principles, such as the inherent worth and dignity of every person, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the interdependent web of all existence, that's 3 of the 7 principles that unite Unitarian Universalists throughout the world. A set of principles that we adhere to. They're not articles of faith, they're not beliefs. They would be in the nature of self-evident truths. They're things that you come to know and understand, not believe. I'll have more to say about the evil of belief later. And it's a praxis because it's the way these principles, which all humanists would accept, they're essentially humanist and rationalist principles, are engaged, applied and put into practice. Unitarianism is a way of looking at life with curiosity, openness, non-discrimination and choiceless awareness. In one sense, it performs a similar function to a philosophy, although not actually a philosophy as such, in that it provides a fundamental and, not fundamentalist, but fundamental and overall coherent apparatus for understanding various fields of human endeavour, including politics, economics, sociology, psychology, philosophy, theology, ethics and the arts. I mentioned that Unitarianism is not and never has been a matter of belief. One Unitarian minister of yesteryear, L.B. Fisher from America, said, "We do not stand at all." When asked what was his position on a certain thing, he said, "We don't have a position, we do not stand, but we move. We constantly move and evolve in our ideas," and certainly mine have over time with respect to religion and many other matters. I'm sure yours has too. We have no doctrine or dogma. We're in a type of church that is non-creedal, like Baptists and certain others. There is no creed, there is no confession, no articles of faith that have to be accepted on faith. It goes beyond belief. In fact, I will talk about belief now. I want to first of all quote some words from the current president of the Unitarian Universalist Association in America, and his first Latino president. There was 2 denominations in America. The Unitarian Church, or the American Unitarian Association, was the national body of churches there, and then you had the Universalist Church of America. They were very, very similar. One minister, Thomas Starr King, and there's a theological college named after him, who in his time had been both a Unitarian and a Universalist minister, put it something like this. These aren't his exact words, I'll see if I can get them roughly right. He said, the Universalists believe that God is too good to damn a person forever to everlasting punishment, and the Unitarians believe that man is too good to be punished forever. Anyway, they came together in 1961. This is what Morales, the current president of the UUA, a member of that body, said, "I am convinced that belief in the way we usually use the word is the enemy of faith, religion, spirituality." Let me say that again. Belief is the enemy of faith. When we dwell on beliefs, we ask all the wrong questions. My faith is much more about what I love than about what I think. He said, belief is a corruption of true religion. True religion is about what we love. Religion that transcends culture, race and class. Religion where we can grow spiritually. And by spiritually, he doesn't mean supernaturally, but something that embraces psychology and that goes beyond it. I firmly believe that religion works in the psychological area entirely. Well, I like some words of the Buddha too. Buddhism in its early form was quite empirical. The Buddha said, "Believe nothing because a so-called wise man said it. Believe nothing because a belief is generally held. Believe nothing because it is written in ancient books. Believe nothing because it is said to be of divine origin. Believe nothing because someone else believes it. Believe only what you yourself judge to be true. Well, that's an improvement on the belief business, but I actually go further and often write in my blog that we ought not to believe anything at all. Belief is the enemy of reality and experiencing reality. Now, I'm not a nihilist, not as in Fred Nile, but a nihilist, you know what I mean. I hold certain truths, most of which are self-evident truths, at least they're self-evident to me. I have certain convictions that I have arrived at through reason, experiential knowledge, and understanding. The Buddha is also alleged to have said, do not believe, because if you believe, you will never know and understand. If you want to know and understand, don't believe. And the Buddha referred to beliefs as avanas, a Sanskrit word meaning veil or covering, a bit like a Venetian blind. And when you adopt a belief system of whatever kind, it's like putting a veil over your eyes. No longer are you in direct and immediate contact with reality, because everything you're seeing and experiencing is being filtered through a belief system. So I encourage my members, and there's 2 or 3 of them here today, not to believe at all. It took me many years, many decades to get to that point where I felt comfortable enough about getting rid of all beliefs. I don't think I have any left. I keep questioning myself to see if I do. But there are certain ideas, certain convictions that I have, certain things that I affirm as true, like those principles of Unitarian Universalism. Well, let's talk a little bit more about Unitarianism, if you don't mind. We haven't got the time to go into groups like the Ebionites and the Samosatanians and the Arians and the Photinians, and people like Francis David and Faustus Aquinas and Michael Servetus, who was burnt at the stake by John Calvin, and the Unitarian king of Transylvania, King John Sigismund, many interesting people. Unitarians have been in Australia for quite a while. The first recorded Unitarian on Australian soil was not a member of the establishment but a convict, quite appropriately. The Reverend Thomas Fish Palmer was sentenced to writing seditious and inflammatory writing, specifically a tract against the corrupt property franchises in election to the House of Commons, and he was sent to Botany Bay, arriving here in 1794. The Sydney congregation, of which I was a pastor, was founded in 1850. So it's not something new, it's been around for quite a while. I was so interested in listening to the little bit about Australia not being a Christian nation. That is certainly true, and I learned a lot from that, thank you. I've done a fair bit of research into the American nation. You hear the same sort of nonsense over there, that America is a Christian country from the wretched fundamentalists, and it's not true. If you study American history and politics, you'll learn that that country and its important documents, legal documents, were put together by free thinkers and Unitarians and deists, and rationalists, people who had no time at all for orthodox religion. You know, Thomas Jefferson, the 3rd president, who had so much to do with the Declaration of Independence, he would spend his evenings in the White House putting the blue pencil through parts of the Bible that he couldn't accept. I think there were more verses struck out than ones he did, and you can buy a copy of the Jefferson Bible today, or possibly it's on the internet, you can read it online. The 2nd President, John Adams, railed against a lot of fundamental Christian doctrines and didn't mind saying so. So that was the sort of the way it was formed. They were incredible people, and I think if you're interested, I have written a paper which is on the net called The Religious Beliefs of the Founding Fathers of the United States of America, which is based on the talk I gave at the Sydney Unitarian Church. Unitarianism played a very major role in the early stages. I mentioned 5 Unitarian presidents. 3 of them were in the first 5 presidents. In more recent years, it hasn't played a major role, and the sad thing about the denomination in America is, and I suppose in Australia too, is that it is shrinking, or at least the membership of the UUA is about the same now as it was in 1961 when the two churches came together as one. So it's, in other words, it's declined in real terms. The membership of it and its membership of liberal churches always increases when there's something dramatic. For example, I was speaking to Peter Morale, he's the president of the UUA, and he said after 9/11 we had a huge, well, huge for us, he said, interest in people joining up. The moment the ugly face of religious fundamentalism rears its head, as it does, well, it's always there, but from time to time people move in that direction. But the problem the humanists face too is that people don't want to join. There's so many people out there that are like us, but they're a mob that's not into joining. They're very much into the religion of consumerism. Oh, I wish I had more time to talk to you about Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau and how the Unitarians in America came out of the Congregationalists and radicalised America. People like William Ellery Channing, who was the foremost Unitarian preacher in the 19th century, many other greats. Humanists themselves had an incredible influence upon the Unitarian Church and helped to move it moving out of the orbit of Christianity into a more humanist position. You know, the first Humanist Manifesto in 1933, 34 liberal humanists, and they were mainly Unitarian ministers, all but about one, along with philosopher John Dewey, put together that first manifesto. So they're there right at the beginning, so to speak. Can there be a rational faith? Because my paper is headed A Rational Faith, Humanism, Enlightenment, Ideals, and Unitarianism. For many of you, perhaps the words rational faith and rationality and faith just seem to be oxymoronic. Depends how you define faith. Faith for Unitarians, if we use the word at all, is seen not as some adherence to a fixed set of beliefs or trust in a personal or suprapersonal God of a supernatural kind. As I said, I reject all notions of higher and lower levels of reality. Got that from my reading of John Anderson's studies, Professor John Anderson. There's a few here that belong to the Sydney Realist group, which when I have time I get to, but I normally work on the day that they hold their meetings. But it's a wonderful group that tries to keep aflame the light of empiricism and realism. And no, faith, as we would see it, would be living with courage and confidence. And that takes a certain faith, if you want to call it that, to live with courage and confidence in a world where we don't know the future. Now, I firmly believe we have to rely upon reason and scientific inquiry in order to solve human problems, rejecting any idea of infallible scripture and divine revelation. It's often said about Unitarianism that we try to have religion without revelation and spirituality without superstition, supernaturalism. Having said that, I know some members of my group, not my group, but others around, who do hold a supernatural view of reality. And no one is excluded from being a Unitarian if they believe in a traditional God. It's just that you're not likely to find people of that kind. The average Unitarian, if we can speak, and there are so many different types, was likely to be quite left-leaning, very much committed to social justice, would abhor the current federal government, like most in this room, if not all. This is the sort of thinking that I grew up with. I was reared a Baptist, although my parents were very nominal churchgoers. My mother had been reared as a Baptist, but she didn't really have any belief in the supernatural or the hereafter, but she felt it was a good thing to send me off to a Baptist Sunday school. I'm pleased for one thing, because two things. I did meet my wife there, whom I'm still married to, and I did get a great knowledge of the Bible, which has enabled me to engage in some high-level debates with the Archbishop of Sydney and the Bishop of South Sydney and various others. Some of those debates are available on the net. They're wonderful. This is the sort of thinking that I did hear from the man who was the pastor of my church for many years. God has spoken his final word in Jesus Christ. That's typical evangelical thinking. God has spoken his final word in Jesus Christ. And he would also say, if Christianity is right, all other religions are wrong. And if you studied anything about logic, you'll know that's a conditional statement. It's not an argument at all, as it doesn't specify the premises that are needed to support the purported conclusion. That sort of idea of infallibility is a dangerous one. Even reason's not infallible. And I'll finish with this, I'm in the business of changing people's lives. Having recovered myself from alcoholism, which almost ruined my life and my career and my family, I'm interested in helping others recover from that and other illnesses. And I'm interested in principles that can help people to change. And I've found that William James was right, the great father of American psychology, great philosopher, that people only change when the desire for change, the wanting to change, the emotion is strong. I tried to get that principle across when I was president of the two bodies, that people don't change by reason, by virtue of reason alone. Every thought we now know, and I'm so pleased that you mentioned this too, every thought has a feeling component to it. They're inseparable. Yes, I believe in the reason to solve human problems, but when it comes to sort of the personal change from problems in which people are in bondage to themselves, to a false idea of who they are, you need to work very much on the emotional level as well. That's why that word rational humaneness is so important. Rationality on its own is a dangerous thing. Of course, so is emotion. It's a tricky thing. And I find that one of the best things about religion, and what I like, for example, the service last night, I have no sense of a supernatural God or that, but you know, they had some beautiful ritual there, and colour and incense, and a whole lot of things that provide what's called transformative ritual. The people can engage in that if they do meaningfully, and in various levels, at a psychological level, I see it. They can change, hopefully for the better. There are some good things to be said about religion, and it's why I found the best way to go was to move down this path of Unitarianism, where I can provide some sort of a ministry, and I don't mean that in any traditional Christian sense, some sort of a ministry to people of every faith and no faith at all. They're all welcome in my home if they have love in their heart and reason in their brain. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ian, for that very interesting talk, and especially the part about emotion where you completed the talk. I do agree with you that we humanists are a bit lacking in that department. Speaking for the New South Wales Society, when we have our Christmas end of year party, there's a sort of lack of elan vital when we have it, which you get in spades, perhaps excessively, with a Baptist church or certainly an Assembly of God. Not that we want to, swallow all that religious belief, you see, but there is an element of celebration and emotion, and hopefully this symposium, which is to join the celebration of World Humanist Day, maybe we've managed to do that.